Sambuddha Saranai. Good evening to you and a warm welcome to Beyond the Vision, brought to you by the Buddhist channel. So as you know, we have been discussing during the past few weeks on a very important topic, which is the 37 requisites of enlightenment, and we have been carrying out this discussion over the past few months, of course, and we have come towards the Noble Eightfold Path. So today also we are right here at your homes to gift you with another wonderful gift in Buddhism. So first of all, I would like to welcome, and my most veneration goes to a great personality who have come down all the way from Australia, who is most venerable Ajahn Sujata Thera. A very good evening to you, venerable sir, and also Professor Chandima Vijay Bandara and Mr. Raja Kurupu, our regular panel who is together with us on Beyond the Vision. A very good evening to you, sir, as well. So talking about the topic for the day, so as you know, we have been carrying out the discussion on the Noble Eightfold Path, and we have come towards Samma Vacha, or right speech. So under this aspect, we have spoken on falsehood, how we are going to refrain from falsehood, and how we are going to practice right speech during the course of the last week. So today we will be moving on to the aspect of tail bearing. So let's see what tail bearing is and how we can really avoid this aspect. So first of all, I would like to move to Venerable Sir. Let's give an explanation, Venerable Sir, as to what tail bearing is, because after all, what I feel is that I think we need to first understand the true meanings, the proper meanings of these terms, and then perhaps we should be able to work on these aspects.
I think that's exactly right. When we're studying the Dhamma, our first task should be to understand what is this, what is the text saying, what is the Dhamma saying, and then when we understand that, we can begin to ask, how do we apply this? But as far as tail bearing goes, Pisuna Vacha, in the Pali it's described as repeating elsewhere what's heard here in order to divide these people from those. Yeah. So it doesn't just mean, even the word tail bearing is not entirely an accurate description, because it's not talking about any kind of tales, right, any kind of stories, but specifically those kinds of things whose intention is to divide groups of people from each other. One of the crucial things about right speech and the way that right speech is described in the suttas is it's always described in a positive form. And even though we often, when we take the precepts and so on, we say, I will refrain from false speech, it's just in a negative form. But in fact, in the suttas, in the gradual training, it always says that one speaks words that are delightful, words that are pleasing to the ear, words that are going to the heart, words that will reconcile those who are divided and bring together people. Yeah? So it's not just refraining from the wrong kind of speech, but it's an active practice of that kind of speech which will bring harmony between people.
Absolutely, Venerable Sir. So in fact, I think when it comes to words, this is the most important tool behind communication. So words are the most important things that all of us, it's not only human beings, it's any other being, it could be, that they use for communication. So it's important that you use this tool properly and make sure that you use it in the right way. So this is the aspect that you need to remember. And moving on to Professor Chandima Vijay Bandara, I would like to ask you, sir, so as Venerable Sir mentioned, tail bearing, this aspect, mostly we look into the side where people are divided, where disputes happen between people because of the reason that some other people perhaps go and say something to another person. So how do you see this aspect?
Well, actually the language is for communication, and if you communicate wrong things, bad things, right, with bad motivation, it's going to be tail bearing, because people actually like to listen from one person and tell it to another person. They think that's communication, yes, right? But actually communication has a motivation behind, right? Why should you communicate this way, right? So if you hear somebody speaking about another person with bad motive, right, it's bad, you know it's bad, but if you also participate in that activity, you tell that story, yeah, you were criticized by this person this way to another person, that is another bad action, because the other person will also now, in the beginning only one person was having hateful thoughts for another person. Now you have added another person is also into that, right. Sometimes you may add many more people to it, and so many people can get angry with each other, and this enmity is very disastrous, destructive, and very antisocial activity it is. But the Buddha did not want that to happen. Buddha wanted the Buddhist community to be a friendly, happy group, and as Venerable Sujato has correctly mentioned, that was the positive use of language the Buddha wanted to encourage. And Buddha in fact has said that when somebody, when you see some people are sort of broken, they are not happy with each other, it is our duty to make them friends. Binnanangva sandhata, when you see somebody angry with each other, right, loggerheads, right, your duty is to make them friends, not to make them further enemies, not to increase the enmity, but to make friends. So you have to refrain from pisuna vacha, right, especially when you hear that people talk sort of bad points of other people. That's an area where you have to be silent. If you cannot make them friends, at least being silent is actually a service that you can do. But people enjoy doing harm, because it's easier. It's very strange that it's easier for people to enjoy when they see other people suffer, right, enmity and various other problems. So they enjoy making people enemies, right.
In fact, yes, and while you said that, another thing that I would like to stress on is the fact where when it comes to tale bearing, what I've seen is that people do this with the intention of harming the reputation of another person.
That's right.
Yeah,
yes,
so it's
yes.
totally with ill will.
Totally with ill will. Yeah, they have, as you said, in addition to making people enemies of each other, to make people sort of unpopular, right? Because if you tell someone that some people are gossiping about you and talking these type of things, right, then you become unpopular, right? Then people, in addition to become angry with you, right, talk about your bad habit of gossiping, bad habit of criticizing other people. So you can make someone unpopular as well. Yeah, it's also very antisocial activity, right? The language you can use for better purposes, you are abusing. Right? So it's a very bad thing, a very un-Buddhistic thing.
That's true, Professor. So moving on to Mr. Raja Kurupu, I would like to ask you, like Professor mentioned, the important aspect that Lord Buddha has stressed on is we need to practice goodwill among everyone. So practicing ill will, so this is tale bearing. So what are your comments on this aspect, sir?
Buddhima, as you mentioned, we are very happy to have with us in our discussion today Venerable Sujato Thero from Australia, who is a leading disciple of the well-known meditation monk Ajahn Brahmavansu, who has visited Sri Lanka a number of times. So we wish that you will have a very pleasant stay here, because we understand that this is your first visit to this country. So your stay here will be pleasant and fruitful. Now, before coming to goodwill, I have some comments to make on what Venerable Sir as well as the Professor mentioned. Now, Venerable Sir, you were mentioning about tales, and you said because sometimes this is translated as tale bearing. But now, as you quite rightly said, Venerable Sir, all tales are not tale bearing, because you can say harmless tales. You see harmless tales, and sometimes, Professor, valuable tales also.
Yes.
Valuable tales will be a good instruction. So sometimes this is translated as the disintegration of fellowship, disintegration, because that leads to disharmony, as Professor was emphasizing, disharmony. So that is one aspect. Then you were mentioning, Buddhima, about other beings also. Speech is important, but it is much more important to humans than to other beings, because the other beings, most of them, they don't have a proper language to speak in.
Yes.
They can make themselves just understood by various indications, some kind of noises, they can in a very broad sense, but in a detailed speech they cannot engage in. So this is a gift. We have been mentioning, Venerable Sir, in our previous discussion also, this speech is a gift given to humans, and they should appreciate the value of it and make good use of it. Now, also it was mentioned about the motive, Professor. You mentioned about the motive. The motive is to bring about disharmony between people, to create trouble. Of course, Buddhima, generally they come as if they are very concerned about your welfare.
Yes.
And that is why they are coming with these tales, harmful tales. But real intention is to bring disintegration, disharmony between individuals or groups of individuals. So that is to be condemned in Buddhism, bring division. Now, Venerable Sir, you also mentioned the other aspect, that what we should do in a positive way is to encourage people getting together.
Yes.
If they are already getting on well, to strengthen that relationship. If they are not getting on that well, to improve that relationship. And as Professor mentioned, if they are on bad terms, you can make an effort, but if you are unsuccessful, you will not go to add to their disharmony that already exists. Now, you were saying about this goodwill. Now, that is the positive aspect.
Yes.
You see that what we should to engage in is kind of speech which will bring together people. You see, together, as I mentioned a little while ago, together people who are already together and who are living in disharmony together. That is the positive aspect.
That's true, Mr. Rajakurupu. So moving on, I would like to stress on this aspect, Venerable Sir. Now, Chetanaham Bhikkhave Kammam Vadami. Everything happens now when it comes to Kamma. It affects according to the Chetana. The effects come according to the Chetana or the intention. Now, the intention is very much important in this aspect, because after all, when it comes to right speech, now this is an action that you are performing. So, how does intention really apply here? Because sometimes a person might carry a tale without really the intention of perhaps harming another person, without having the intention of perhaps doing something wrong. He might just carry on the tale, go and tell it to somebody else. So how can this aspect be clarified, Venerable Sir?
And that's a doubly difficult aspect of practice, because we're often very unclear about what our own intentions are. And normally, in fact, if we're influenced by anger or some other kind of painful feeling in our heart or something like that, we always find some way of justifying that. Yeah, we always tell ourselves a tale. Yeah, not just telling others the tales. We tell ourselves a tale which justifies why it's okay to do this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is where we need to sort of stop a little bit, and we need to reflect. But we also need to be careful that we shouldn't let our speech be shut down because we're too afraid to speak. Sometimes, even if we are angry, sometimes even if we are upset, we need to speak anyway. And this is a skill that we need to learn, that we can speak even in those difficult circumstances, but without letting our speech be dominated by that. We feel the anger, we know that it's there, and you keep that to one side, and you still try to use the words of speech. And this is something I've tried in my own practice. And one of the things that I consciously did is that when I'm angry with somebody, I will always slow my speech down and speak more quietly. So I
think that really works, Venerable Sir.
Yeah, if you ever hear me speaking like this to you, then you should be worried. And you're aware of that, and you counteract it. And because if you feel like you can't speak, right, the anger tends to get even more bottled up. You get even more angry, and things can get even more worked up, and it can become even more toxic. So have to learn, and this is the difficult task, to speak even when you're in the midst of all of these things.
I think that requires a lot of balance in the mind, Venerable Sir, because after all, the way you react into situations is very much important, like Venerable Sir mentioned. So moving on to Mr. Rajakurupu. Sir, now when it comes to tale bearing, another important aspect is that people do carry tales, and they continuously go and tell another person, and then it becomes a whole problem finally, a conflict in the society. So how can this aspect be stopped, and how can you give up this habit? Because it becomes a habit when you continuously do it.
Yes, Buddhima, it is a skill that you have to develop. That is, you must be mindful. Sati is an important factor.
Yes.
There are, as we have been mentioning on previous discussions, some of the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path have a bearing to other factors of the path. And two main things are the sati, mindfulness and energy, virya.
Virya.
So, in that sense we have to be very vigilant in that respect to see that we do not add to the troubles that already exist or bring conflicts in society. Generally, of course, it is an individual exercise that you have to do by yourself. Of course, your exercise may be an example for others to follow who are observing you. Now, Venerable Sir, you mentioned about that sometimes you are not very clear of your intention, but sometimes people are very clear of their intention and that is to bring disharmony, disharmony between various groups or individuals. Then you also mentioned about anger, that of course in a way you are quite right, Venerable Sir, because sometimes when you keep silent, you see that can make the person who is angry even more angry, that is possible. But on the other hand, if you are also in a disturbed state of mind, a little calmness and little concentration on your part might be helpful for you.
Of
Then
course,
to speak not in harsh language as you mentioned, but in very calm and collected manner, so that the other person, his anger will calm down, will subside in that connection. So that is also a very important aspect that we have to remember.
Yeah, that's true, sir. And moving on to the very next aspect, which is harsh speech. Now, this is something that is again frequently being practiced, Professor, in the present day society, because we can see whenever there's a conflict that happens amongst two individuals, there will be one person who starts off to grumble up, and then it becomes a whole conversation, and the other person also continues. So, how can you define harsh speech?
Well, actually, the word harsh says everything about it, right? It's not soft, it's actually hurting, right? So, if our speech hurts the feelings of another person, and if it does not positively contribute to our friendship or somebody else's friendship, right, that's harsh, that's painful, that's unbearable. And so, harsh speech is actually, right, by definition something bad, right? But the problem is that some people think, right, they can assert themselves by using harsh speech, and they can dominate the scene by becoming rather harsh, right. So, this weakness of individuals to be dominant, right, be prominent, right, you know, they think the easiest way is to use harsh language, strong language, and then to silence other people, right. So, we have to reflect on what we say, how do we say, and all that, because we have been frequently emphasizing that the purpose of language is actually positive, right, to create a positive situation where everybody can live in harmony, peace and everything. But if we use harsh speech and try to sort of dominate the scene by being unpleasant, right, we may be sort of winning in a way, right. Sometimes we may silence everybody, right, being so harsh.
Where people take up ownership, sometimes
Right.
they think, yes, I need to use this sort of a speech, and this is how I need to control the others.
Yeah, you may control for the time being, but what you are gaining, you have to reflect on the results. End results is actually bad for you. You are not becoming loved by other people, right? If we communicate with other people using our own language and effort, and then what we gain is unpleasant, right? We become unpopular and we gain their hate, then we are losing, right? Why the purpose of language is to become popular, to become loved, right? The Buddha, every time he spoke with other people, he gained popularity. He was loved by other people. They thought Buddha is a nice person and he is talking for the benefit of them, all that. Therefore, harsh speech must be avoided, because it's for it will create bad image on us, and it will make lose our friends, right? Because nobody wants to be friendly with somebody who is of harsh speech, right? People want soft spoken, nice, pleasant person to be his friend, right? So, harsh speech is actually very much hurting, and actually when I say that, somebody will say, well, there is a purpose of using harsh speech at certain times. Yes, true. When you read about the Buddha's language policy in suttas like Abhay Rajakumara, right, someone wanted to trap the Buddha, asking, Venerable Sir, you are not using harsh speech at all, isn't that so? Right? Buddha said, well, I am here rather discriminating in my policy, right? Sometimes it serves the purpose of, being rather tough, rough, and so at that times, for the benefit of others. So the motivation is very important,
Yes.
right? If you are motivated with good thoughts that you can get someone to the correct side by using a little bit of harsh speech, when that's a sort of approvable time. But generally, pleasant words are the sort of most powerful ways of winning other people, most powerful ways of convincing other people, and most powerful ways of making yourself also loved by other people.
That's true, sir, because after all, words, the language, this is the gift that we are given. Being born as human beings, I think this is a very rare opportunity. You need to understand this aspect, because after all, being born as a human being, you need to understand the fact that you are given all the privileges to walk in this wonderful path, to practice this Dhamma, to listen to the Dhamma and understand it and put it into practice, because like I always mention, a pinch of practice is worth than a ton of theory. So you need to always keep this in mind. And moving on to Venerable Sir, I'd like to ask you, sir, using pleasant words, how can a person really practice this, put it into practice? Because like sir mentioned, there will be conditions where you need to really use harsh words, and things will happen in that way, but still, how do you manage things up? How do you use mindfulness there? And virya, right effort also comes into play at this aspect, sir.
Well, if there's a situation where you need to criticize somebody, or if something's gone wrong and you need to speak. So again, we don't fall into the trap of thinking we have to be nice to each other all the time. Sometimes people do things that are wrong, and we need to talk about that. But we need to try to set up a situation where that can be done in the best possible way, and we need to be very careful about that. First thing to do is to choose the right time, right? Don't choose somebody when they're busy and flustered and running around doing a million things, and then dump your thing on top of their heads. Yeah? You say, excuse me, there's something we'd like to talk about. It's important. Could we please take some, put aside some time where we can talk this through? It's so important. So many times I've seen this, that things just get worse because it's just thrown into the mix. You've got a million and one things happening, and somebody puts this in, and you're supposed to deal with it, and it makes it so much harder. First thing, create the space, the time and the space. You sit down, and then when you bring up the issue, you don't bring it up in an aggressive way, but nor do you bring it up in a patronizing way. You just bring it up in a clear and straightforward way. But the first thing is that you always do is to ask, what are the facts? What happened? In the Vinaya, this is something which is a very powerful thing to learn when you're studying the Vinaya. You see how the Buddha worked in practical circumstances. Yeah? And whenever anybody would come to the Buddha and criticize somebody or something like that, the first thing he would do would say, please invite that monk to come and see me. And they would sit down, and the first thing he would say, is this true? Right? Now, normally in our speech, that's the last thing anybody says, right? We go repeating it and so on and so forth. First thing, is it true? Did it actually happen? Yeah? And then if somebody's done something wrong and there's a need to criticize them, then the Buddha would criticize them and say, this is wrong, it's the wrong thing to do, and then this is what we should be doing, or this is the right course of action. But because it's contained, it has a right time and place, then you can manage it in that situation. So stick with the facts, make a good time and place to do with it, to do this with the harsh speech, and once it's done, you leave it behind. Right? It's if somebody makes a mistake, it's just a mistake, that's all. We've all made so many mistakes. Point it out, clear it up, forgive, let go, move on.
That's true, Venerable Sir, because after all, mistakes everybody makes, but after all, you need to learn from the mistakes, and perhaps that is how you can certainly make up your way. So, moving on to Rajakurupu Sir, I'd like to ask you, sir, I think this is one of the most easiest out of the 4 aspects of right speech to practice, because this is something that you can really think, okay, when it comes to a situation, right, if I am going to be angry at this situation, right, I am going to perhaps use pleasant language, and I will approach it in such a manner that I would not hurt the feelings of another person, and I think we can do it like that, don't you think so?
Yeah. Buddhima, before I comment on your question about this being one of the, perhaps one of the easiest things among the factors of right speech for you to observe. I have a few more things to say about tail bearing. Now, this tail bearing generally, Venerable Sir, leads to two evils, not only the tail bearing itself, but to falsehood also, because to make the tail more attractive, that may be accepted by the person you are addressing, you tend to exaggerate. Sometimes it is complete falsehood. If it is not a complete falsehood, it is an exaggeration of what has been done. Then also there is also this aspect that if a tale is even true, you are not expected to convey it if it will bring disharmony. What as we have been emphasizing Buddhima, what we should do is to carry various tales or events, speak of events which will bring harmony between people. Then there is also the great advantage is avoiding slander, avoiding carrying tales can be very helpful to you, Venerable Sir, in this life itself, because people will have confidence in you, that you will not let them down, you see. So, the trust and confidence that you build up will be a dividend that you will be able to enjoy in this life itself. Then going on to your question, that this is one of the easiest things to do, I think that is very true, because now it was mentioned that sometimes it may be necessary to use harsh language, because when you want to reprimand a person for some very unwholesome action he had done. But there are also, Venerable Sir, the languages are fairly rich, the English language, our own Sinhala language, the Tamil language, they are rich in vocabulary. So, there are words of a parliamentary nature, not harsh words. You see, parliamentary language, there is words that could be utilized to convey the meaning that what you have done is absolutely wrong. Then also the impact that will have on the person who is listening. When you are using harsh words, the person might think that you are angry, and therefore, Venerable Sir, might not give adequate thought to the valid criticism that is being made. Now, even we have mentioned this before Buddhima, even children, they know sometimes when the parents are scolding them, they are doing it a fit of anger. But as Venerable Sir said, the timing is very important, time. If you just pull up the child at that time, but later on, when things have calmed down, you yourself have calmed down, and you tell the child, now that day what you did was wrong, and explain, the child also will be in a more amenable position to listen to what the parents have to say. So, this easy aspect comes in, you can make it a way of life, a habit. When you get in, Professor, into the habit of using only decent language, not harsh language, even when you are disturbed, it is decent language. It becomes a habit, the habit formation, and you will refrain from doing it. You will use certain words to convey the meaning that what has been done is totally unsatisfactory, but at the same time, you have not violated the condition mentioned under right speech of engaging in harsh speech.
That's true, sir, because after all, I think if you can make it a part of your life, you can certainly reflect on it always. I think that helps you to walk in the proper path. And in fact, moving on to Professor, I would like to ask you, sir, now, I think the practice of, especially when it comes to right speech and or any other right aspect of the Noble Eightfold Path, it requires patience and tolerance. Now, this is one important aspect, because sometimes when you become aggressive, you lose patience, and then that is the turning point where you start using harsh speech and so on. So, how can really patience and tolerance help you to practice this wonderful aspects?
It's a very important aspect you are focusing on. Before that, I would just add one word about what Radhikapu said about tail bearing. Right, when you say that it's very difficult for people to exactly report when you do tail bearing. So I think that's one universal feature regarding communication, that people find it absolutely difficult to sort of give a carbon copy of the version that he heard. Right. I got this because I focused on this because to tell you one very important story in Greek mythology,
Right, sir. Please go
because,
ahead.
yes, because there is a sort of branch of knowledge that called hermeneutics.
Yeah.
Hermeneutics is actually to interpret the messages that has been transpired through generations to generations. It started as a sort of tool to interpret Bible, but now it's used for interpreting Buddhism as well. But generally it is called hermeneutics, and why it is called hermeneutics is very interesting.
Yeah.
The Hermes is actually a Greek god. He is the god between men and gods, right? So when gods need to send a message to human beings, they get Hermes to take the message to human beings, right? So Hermes hears from gods and come to human world to tell to human beings. And it is always believed that Hermes in between adds something to the message. So people never get God's message. So they had to develop this art, hermeneutics, to really go to the what meant by the. So this shows that even the messengers, right, even if they are divine, right, have the habit of putting something from their own pocket.
I
So
remember doing a secret passing at school, sir.
that's right, isn't it? Yeah, you add something.
Yeah,
That's
you always
because
add something.
every human being is very creative. So we are creative. So we want to sort of enrich the message that we are taking. So in Sri Lanka, there is a story about the crow, the lady who gave birth to 7 crows, 7 baby crows. Right? It started by seeing just a feather, just a feather near some vomit of somebody, right? And then the first person reported that someone has vomited crow feathers. Another one said one has sort of vomited a crow, right? Another one said several crows. And then eventually the 7th person said that one lady has given birth to 7 baby crows. So this gets creatively increased.
Exaggerated.
Right, so exaggerated. So this type of tendency is there among human beings. So people want to sort of, whenever they report somebody's speech also, to add some color, and it's always negative color. To say that he spoke bad, it's very difficult.
But sometimes it could be the way that the person heard it, or maybe the way the person understands that the person will be communicating, maybe not really from that intention. Yeah.
Well, yeah, intention may be a hidden intention, right? People, although they don't know themselves that they have bad intentions in their mind, but they enjoy when others are angry with somebody else, right? So they want to make people angry, and they make people to see how people behave when they are in agitation, right? So to do this, they add something from their pocket, right? So that's one thing. And what you mentioned is that people need patience and tolerance, right? So when